You and real quick, my wife Emily is also joining us as a guest today. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker, Rick Wagoner. Rick had a 32-year career with General Motors, starting in the company's financial staff in New York. During his early career, he served as Chief Financial Officer for GM do Brasil, GM of Canada, and GM Europe, and then President of GM do Brasil. At age 39, Rick was named Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of General Motors Corporation, during which period he also ran GM's global purchasing and supply chain activities. 2 years later, he became president of GM's largest business, its North American operations, and in 1998 was named President and Chief Operating Officer of the company. In 2000, Rick was elected President and Chief Executive Officer, the youngest in General Motors history, and assumed the chairman's role as well in 2003. Since his retirement from GM in 2009, Rick has been very active as a board member and advisor to many businesses and educational institutions. Among current business activities, he serves as chair of the board of Invesco and a board member of ChargePoint Inc., Excelitas Technologies, and Graham Holdings. He advises a number of financial firms and a number of smaller auto/technology startup businesses. He continues to maintain close relationships around the globe, especially in China, where he is an honorary member of the mayor of Shanghai's Business Advisory Council. Among his not-for-profit activities, Rick currently serves on the Virginia Commonwealth University Board of Visitors, the Duke University Health System Board of Directors, and chairs the Duke Kunshan University Advisory Board. He is a former chair of the Duke University Board of Trustees. Rick earned his Bachelor's of Arts summa cum laude from Duke University, where he was elected Phi Beta Kappa, and his MBA from the Harvard Business School. He also received an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters degree from Virginia Commonwealth University in 2011. And it's our pleasure to have him here with us today. Welcome, Rick Wagoner.
Thanks very much, Dave. That's great to be here and nice to see everybody and get a little local flavor of what's going on in the community as I sat in. And I do a lot of these Zoom meetings, and one of the things I like is you can wear a decent shirt and sweater up top and your shorts on the bottom, but you expose me because I wasn't thinking about the Pledge of Allegiance today, so you caught my red shorts. So I'm busted now. As I get started, Dave and I talked about what format to use, and we thought maybe I would just open up with a couple of comments about kind of what's going on in the industry, what I find interesting about it. And then I think he's collected some questions from you. And so then we can move on to those. We thought it might be a little more interesting that way. So Dave, should I take it away?
Take it away. Yes, please.
Good. First of all, it's a pleasure to look into the screen and see Kathy Myers, who I haven't seen for a while. And I guess, Tom, it's been a while we've talked, but I haven't seen you for a while. So I think the last time we saw the three Myers in this picture together, was maybe at Cedar Point about 25 years ago when Dave was maybe even more, was a little bit younger. But Tom, I was thinking today, next year it'll be 50 years that we have known each other. And I guess it's amazing, given what we did the first 4 or 5 years when we knew each other, that we're still alive now, now that I think about it. Tom,
amen to that, brother.
We've agreed we would not share any stories from college because I think that could get ugly fast. So what's going on in the auto industry, I think, is very interesting. Probably just the thing that's happened here in the last 6 or 8 months with this COVID-19 impact has been interesting and instructive to study versus what happened in the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. Obviously, if one was sitting back in late March, the prospects look pretty grim for the economy as a whole, and particularly for the auto sector. And it's interesting to see here, only 6 months later, how rapidly the sector's come back. I think it's for several reasons. First of all, I think they've done an admirable job of getting production back started up in a safe way at a time when that seemed like a very difficult thing to do. And they've been able to ramp production quite well. And I think that's been important. I think the second factor that's been very interesting, though, is consumers have come back to the market in a very strong way, much stronger than people were expecting. And I think it at least is in part related to the reaction that the public has had to the COVID virus, in which a couple of the sort of long-term trends that were leaning against the auto sector have actually reversed themselves. Urbanization, everybody wanted to live in Manhattan. Now no one wants to live in Manhattan. Everybody wants to move to Connecticut or whatever. And I think that sort of thing is repeating itself around a number of the major cities. And when people move out of major cities and into suburbs, they need vehicles. So that's provided increased demand. And it's clear that the favored form of transportation for just about everybody these days now is driving your own car, because people feel safest, particularly vis-a-vis contracting the virus. So it'll be interesting to see as we look out, a year or so from today, were those temporary blips, or does that trend provide a little more wind in the sail of the auto industry as far as total demand? So I think all in all, the industry's responded well, and their financial situation is looking pretty good. The used cars are in very short supply, and used car prices are high. So it's a surprisingly robust situation that the industry faces right now versus, I think, what we all would have thought. On the other hand, and maybe even more interesting, these major trends, several major trends are affecting the industry. Really, I think it will result in the greatest changes in the industry in the last century. Frequently talked about is the shift of propulsion systems from internal combustion, gas and diesel, to battery powered, which is ongoing. And we have some questions on that, so we can talk more about that. But I, for one, having in the 1990s spent $1 billion trying to launch an electric vehicle, of which we sold about 200, and we lost a lot of money on. It's been interesting to me to see how this time through, there's been a sort of adoption, I think, by the industry as a whole, even globally. And so we're seeing some remarkable improvements in things like battery performance and battery cost, which has been the problem, if you will, up until now, and the reason for low demand. Probably covered just as much in the so-called mega trends of the industry has been this move to autonomous driving. If we were having this conversation about 5 years ago, many automakers, maybe most, would be telling you that they would be having fully autonomous vehicles on the road now in 2020. By the way, the reason you say that in the auto industry, if you say something 5 years from now, people don't usually follow up on you, so you can make robust claims, and everybody did. It's actually gone much slower, and the reason is it's a much harder problem to solve than I think was understood. A friend of mine who's an expert in the field explained it this way. He said, solving for being able to drive electric, the first 90% of stuff that needs to be done is actually quite easy. So as we sat here 5 years ago, people had done the first 90 and just extrapolated forward and said, we can do this in 5 years in a safe and an effective way. And then he says, what the problem is, the next 9% takes as much time as the first 90, and the next 0.99%, which you need to be basically bulletproof if you're going to go autonomous, completely autonomous, is even harder. And so some of these incredibly well-funded companies like Google, now Waymo, are spending billions of dollars on this, and they've got the smartest people that money can hire, and they're making progress, but it's just a tougher problem to fix. And so I think what we're seeing now is the focus is the initial applications will be in places like gated communities, military bases, places where you can combine and cover the different scenarios, the so-called edge cases, as they call them, much more comprehensively. And then the second front that still seems to get a lot of attention is shipping the Class 8 trucks that carry, go across the nation on our interstate highway systems. And again, if you're just on an interstate highway system, it's quite a bit easier to cover the risk cases than if you're driving around country roads in your neighborhood or mine. So that trend isn't dead, it's just taking longer, and it's probably taking more money than people thought as well. The third trend was this idea of sharing of vehicles. Uber was a good example of that, and it seemed like that was really taking the world by storm. And in many cases, younger people said, hey, I'm not even buying cars, I'm just going to Uber everywhere. And the economics of that, by the way, aren't necessarily bad. I think it's sort of driven by the recognition that the statistic for the U.S. as a whole is cars sit idle about 96% of the time. They're quite expensive. So if you could find a way to use them half of the time, you could reduce the cost of vehicle ownership quite a bit. And so that was kind of the theory which got companies like Uber and Lyft going. Obviously, with the pandemic, that has put a little bit of a damper on that. And so I think what people thought was an inevitable trend that would actually move faster maybe than the other two now seems to have been slowed down quite a bit. And we'll have to see how that comes back when eventually we get, hopefully get over this crisis. So these are the kind of things that are going on. And I joke a lot. It's a lot easier to be a retired CEO of an auto company telling the industry what it should be doing than to be an acting CEO of an auto company making these calls, because you really do. If you want to be around in 20 years, you have to be investing very seriously in EVs. And also, by the way, fuel cells seem to be making another comeback. You have to be serious about a strategy for autonomous, and this is very hard work. You have to make some big investments. You have to convert a lot of your engineering capabilities into electric versus mechanical. You have to be doing that. But you know, if you get there 5 years too early, that's almost as bad as getting there 5 years too late, because you know you've got to sell today and tomorrow to get the revenue to keep funding this machine. So I think the people that are running the big auto companies and their staffs today have a tough assignment, because they have to make these investments, but they have to do them in a way that is consistent with the rate the market will move. The other thing is, and I'll end here, is we'll probably have more new entrants to the auto sector right now than we have had since the beginning of the industry, when it was the Wild West. And this is a new phenomenon. Barriers to entry, as we begin to adopt electric vehicles, are coming down quite a bit. And we obviously have one good example of what appears to be quite an amazing success story in that space, Tesla. But there are a number of serious players coming after them. And this is a dynamic, again, for the established OEMs that's creating some interesting challenges, whether it's traditional distribution model, dealer network, impact on unionized facilities, a lot of stuff that the incumbents have and the new entrants don't have to deal with. It makes for another element that I think is in the mix of what is going to be a significant amount of change in the industry over the next 10 to 20 years. Maybe I'll stop there, Dave, and go to your questions.
That's great, and I appreciate everyone who sent some questions in advance here. Hopefully we can test Rick pretty well with some of these. So one of the first ones here is, should an avid automobile performance enthusiast fear the future of autonomous automobiles and electric vehicles?
Certainly not if he or she is my age. I would say you have nothing to worry about. If you're 30 years old, probably there'll be some changes. I would say the electric, if you're an enthusiast, the electric can actually deliver a better driving experience. It's faster because of the weight distribution. You don't have a big block of metal and engine in the front of the vehicle, but instead you put the batteries in what they're calling a skateboard. You actually get better weight distribution, and so the handling of EVs can be better. And it looks like there's a lot of EVs coming from the performance car manufacturers. So I think if you're an enthusiast and just love to drive, other than the sound of the engine, and I'm sure they can program that in for you, the EVs might actually be a plus. Autonomous is obviously not, if you like to drive. And my former GM colleague, Bob Lutz, who is never at a loss for words even today. I think Bob is probably about 90, but he's still on TV talking about stuff, and he sounds pretty good to me. Bob is, said, in 20 years, anybody who wants to drive a car is going to have to go out to some racetrack and drive around, and they're not going to let you drive on the main roads. I think we're a long ways away from that situation. First of all, the perfect performance of autonomous needs to be proven, and we're a ways away from that. And I think, given a lot of other factors, it's just going to be a long time until we're sent to the racetrack as their only option.
Excellent. The next question is, where do you think automation in production is going to take manufacturing? And how successfully will the U.S. workforce change with it?
Yeah, so that's a good question. You know, when I became CEO of GM, we provided healthcare for 1 million people, and yet we only employed about, I would say at that point, maybe 150, 180,000. And what that is a look back in the history of the auto industry, where A, we were very vertically integrated, but B, we had, it took a lot more people to build a car. And over time we got, I mean, I remember even during my time, there's a standard way to measure productivity, hours per vehicle. We probably went from 50 hours per vehicle to 20 hours per vehicle using things like Toyota Production System and other stuff. So that's been a constant in the industry, and that continues. Having said that, industry volumes have generally grown globally quite a bit, not as much in the US, but they've grown globally, which has protected workforce. And the kind of content in the vehicle has grown exponentially when you think about a vehicle that you owned 30 years ago and the kind of features it had versus today. I mean, it's a dramatic difference. And so that content has to be built by someone, has to be engineered by someone, has to be tested. And so despite productivity improvement in things like engineering as well, the need for engineers, for computer scientists, et cetera, is greater. So I think probably we do see what is seen across the whole US and around the world is sort of a shift in the workforce from maybe less manual and more white collar jobs. And I suspect that's gonna continue, particularly as it relates to the auto sector.
Next question here is ever increasing globalization in the automotive industry likely to produce more industry consolidation or more competitors?
Yeah, so if we had talked about this 10 or 15 years ago, I would have said more consolidation was inevitable because scale was so critical in every aspect of your business. Actually, today, I'm going to answer a little differently. I think we're going to see less consolidation. And as I mentioned in my opening comments, we actually have new entrants coming into the business, which I think the OEMs thought would probably go away, and they're not going away. And I don't know if that trend is going to stop there. What used to drive the need to consolidate was basically synergies of all sorts, whether in product development, manufacturing, sourcing, et cetera. And those are not unimportant today, but I think we're finding, first of all, electric vehicles are much simpler to build. We probably will have most OEMs less vertically integrated even than they are today. And third, and this is a little bit of a obscure point, but I think it'll play out over time. If we move to more and more autonomy in vehicles, and that doesn't mean completely autonomous, but that means better mapping systems, so you can then have longer stretches of roads where you can let the vehicle, in essence, drive itself if you're paying attention. And that's playing out as we speak today. I don't think you're going to see, let's say, China let Google do their map system for China. They're not going to let Google do it. I think, to be honest, the US would not be crazy about one of the Chinese tech guys owning the map system to the US. And the Europeans, you know, they don't like Google, so they're not gonna, they're gonna come up with a European solution for something like mapping systems. And so my guess is the industry is gonna, having gone sort of from national to regional to sort of global in a lot of ways, is somewhat gonna sort back more to a little more of a regional focus, at least from the OEM perspective. That's a theory that I've got, and we'll see how it plays out. So I don't think, I don't necessarily see us having fewer competitors, let's say in the US in 20 years. I would have thought, you know, a number of years ago that trend would be inevitable, but I don't necessarily see that now. I think there'll be a lot of players, some niche focused in certain areas, others, you know, maybe covering a broader range of the market.
That ties well into our next question, which is how long will it be before we see a widely available car from a non-traditional automaker such as Apple or Google?
Well, I mean, you know, I think, you know, we ought to start by saying if we were talking about this 6 or 8 years ago, we would have had none, and now we've got Tesla, who's certainly a startup and non-traditional, and the company that I've been involved with for a long time is going to be a serious player called Rivian. they're doing basically initially pickups and SUVs and delivery vans. There's a company called Lucid, which is going to do a very upscale electric vehicle. And so you're seeing more of those kind of entrants. I think Google, now again, they call that Waymo, I think initially had a view that they would do a car, and I think they've gotten off that now. They're gonna, what appears to me is they've got to deal with Chrysler, they've got to deal with Jaguar, Land Rover, I think they've got to deal with Volvo, where they are providing technology, if you will, and the aforementioned OEMs are providing the vehicles. Apple at one point had apparently a huge effort in vehicle-related stuff. Nothing has surfaced from that, and it's been somewhat quiet. And I think what's happened, by the way, the CFO of Apple used to be my kind of executive assistant at GM. He's obviously done much better than his former boss did, but I jokingly say he knows too much about the car business to allow Apple to get into the business of making cars, which is a pretty tough and unfortunately relatively low return business. So I think that a lot of the tech companies are trying to figure out a role they can play, a technology layer they can bring expertise in, where they can generate good profits and more of the kind of returns they're used to. Let me say software returns rather than hardware returns. So that's my guess, but I do think we'll get a lot of these startups come in, and some will make it.
Great. Next question here is, when do you think a majority of the cars on the road will be electric, and what are some of the key hurdles to getting to that point?
Well, I mean, the biggest hurdle obviously is numbers. There's now probably 280 million vehicles on the road in the US. So to get a majority of those, it's going to take a long time. If you're selling 17 million a year, it's going to take you 50, and all of them are electric, would take you 15 years to get there. So the math will say that, current type vehicles will be on the road for a long time. The asterisk to that would be if there's a scenario under which there's let me say a regulatory requirement that drives it, then, okay, all bets might be off. But I think the biggest factors driving the rate of adoption of EVs are the number of products, all EV products that are offered. And part of the problem has been literally almost up until today, there's only been a handful of EVs offered, particularly by the traditional OEMs. And there's Tesla. Tesla usually runs about 60-70% market share of EVs in the US. But that's going to change because just about everybody has a lot of electric vehicles coming in all sorts of sizes and shapes, from pickup trucks and large SUVs to everything in between. So I think the number of products offered is going to really increase demand quite a bit. Second of all, the cost of EVs has been a problem. The batteries are more expensive than the internal combustion engines. Battery costs are coming down quite a bit. And the story around, cost of ownership, meaning you pay a little more up front for an EV, but the cost to operate it, battery versus gas, even at today's low prices, you get a payback on that. So that will drive, I think, some of the commercial applications to move fastest, short-term deliveries, things like that will move faster. And then I think the third thing that's going to impact is regulatory. And, that could change, in the beginning of next year, depending on which party is elected. You could imagine a stricter regime around emissions requirements. And, in some cases, maybe more aggressive moves. An example of what could happen would be in Europe, which, was slow on the EV pickup, quite slow, but post the diesel mess and that sort of stuff, they're moving with a vengeance to electric. And to most vehicles in Europe, I think probably within 10 years are going to have to be electric new vehicles because the emissions requirements are so stringent, much more stringent than the US. So I think those three factors will drive. If I had to guess today, in 10 years, Europe would have the highest percentage of its new cars electric. China would be second, and the US among those three would be third, but still, significant. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be in 10 years, is it going to be 50%? Well, it's hard for me to guess that. It could be, but it's going to be a significant percent in 10 years.
Great. Just a couple more questions and then we'll open it up. I know there's probably some more in the crowd. Here's a good one. If you could only choose one car to drive from any U.S. manufacturer, what would you choose and why?
That's a softball. I would get the Chevy Corvette 8th generation. I've got a C7 down in my garage, and as soon as I can get around to it, I think I'm going to swap that for a C8. And it's just an unbelievable car at a great value. One of Tom's and my fraternity brother accused me of having some sort of a old man crisis when I bought it, but I still think he wants to drive it. I'm not letting him do it, but yeah, actually, one of our sons who's single and lives in New York has been working from home with us for the last few months, and I haven't been able to get the Corvette all summer.
I'm surprised you let him use it.
Yeah.
Last question. The traditional distributor model of having locally owned distributors with car lots and showrooms seems to be changing with the Tesla model of buying a car online and having it delivered. How do you see the automotive distribution network and business model changing in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Tesla model has worked better than I would have thought. But if you live in Michigan, you can't buy a new Tesla here. You have to go to Ohio or Chicago to buy it. And the servicing is clunky at best. So I don't think they've got it perfectly figured out. And I think it highlights that the traditional dealer network provides some very important functions: vehicle preparation and delivery, carrying of inventory, and vehicle repairs, and the ability to facilitate used car transactions. If you look back over the last, I guess, 40 years, the number of dealers in the U.S. has been shrinking and consolidating, and that's going to continue to happen because of just the economics of the business. I do not see that the incumbents are going to, the incumbent OEMs are going to be able to walk away from this distribution model, but I think dealers are going to have to really mold their traditional way of operating into the way that consumers of the future are going to want to operate, which means much enhanced ability to sell online, which I'm pleased to say that, and I've been told that dealers have actually adopted pretty well during this COVID, and it's really given that a shot in the arm. And I think the business model is going to need to change somewhat. The new car profitability, which used to be the core of the business, has been under a lot of pressure for the dealers. Traditionally made a lot of money in repairs and in used cars. Both of those sectors are sort of being attacked by independents and even some tech-based startups. So I think, over time, the role of the dealership is going to evolve, but I'd be surprised if we come back in 50 years and we didn't have a good number of auto dealers. They'd just be doing some different stuff, servicing fleets, things, changing batteries in EVs, stuff like that.
Great. We can, I guess, open it up to some additional questions. I'll ask one that was put here in the chat from Doug Fuller, and that is, do you have an opinion on the future business relationships between the USA and China?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, it's a different game now. So the period that I was really involved in it was maybe 95 to 2010, and China was the biggest growth opportunity since in the auto industry history, other than U.S. post World War II. Just as long as you got there, had a good partner, and built plants, you could really grow your business, and it was highly, highly profitable, extraordinarily profitable, like GM was in the 60s. That's changing now. The industry, after a period of unbelievable growth, has settled down quite a bit, and the competitive environment's tougher. So, in that sense, it's different. I would say, from the auto sector, most of the business in China is vehicles produced in China and sold in China. That'd be true for GM and its partners there, and most everybody. There has been relatively little export of China vehicles to the US, almost none. And there have been export of some parts and components to China, but over time that has been nationalized there. So the auto industry might not change a whole lot. But I do think just the tone, the political tone between the countries has evolved, and there's a lot of fingers that could be pointed all the way around on that. But I do think China has they've grown tremendously successfully, but they have been slow to adapt some of their policies around, say, intellectual property And so I think, they're under pressure to evolve. There's not just from the US, but from other parts of the world. And then I think this fact of it appears that, we're developing a little bit more of a, and maybe this is a bad phrase to use, but Cold War-esque relationship on the military front with China. And I think that is going to lead to, more restrictions on the kinds of business that can be done on both sides. So I think it's a pretty sensitive and challenging time right now. And I'd like to say I think it's going to go away soon, but I don't. I think if you got a business in China, you're going to have to heads down and just hope something doesn't blow up. But I don't. It's not as easy as it was back when I was running GM, nor is it as profitable.
Assad, look like you got a question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if you can, if since you're so knowledgeable, obviously in this industry, if you were to guess or bet, do you think Tesla would acquire one of the three big automakers, and for strategic reasons, for other reasons which I probably can't even understand or fathom, but and if it would, which one would it be? And maybe just any of your thoughts in that space where a growth of Tesla doesn't come necessarily just purely by just turning the crank and making more cars, but quickly getting access to distribution and those dealers, and perhaps I didn't even realize access to the state of Michigan.
Yeah, that's a good question, Assad. Thanks. So you're talking to a guy who would have lost tons of money shorting Tesla stock over the last 10 years. So take this with a complete grain of salt. I do think what they've accomplished is pretty remarkable. I think their market cap, I still scratch my head at it, but that is a weapon that they could use. But it wasn't until maybe 2 years ago that people were talking about an existing OEM buying Tesla. So it's interesting. That may be the first time anybody's asked me the question the other way, and it's obviously completely doable from the perspective of the capitalization of the company. I'd just be shocked to see them do that and let's say in a decade, as long as Elon's around. I'd say for two reasons. He is all electric, so he doesn't want to taint his image or his brand with anything that's not electric. It's got huge customer loyalty ramifications for him. Second of all, this is a person who likes to do things himself. I mean, he's very vertically integrated in this business. I think that's true in the other businesses that he's in, certainly, I think, in the SpaceX. He likes to do things himself. He likes to have control over it. And so I just, he might be willing to take a plant from an OEM, but I don't think he would want to take, products. And I don't think he would, say, oh, I'd like to hire, acquire to get a management team. I think he thinks he can build that. So I, for one, would be surprised to see that happen, which means, based on my track record of forecasting, Tesla will probably be announced tomorrow morning.
Roger Zodi.
Rick, thank you. Northeastern Ohio took a big hit when Lordstown plant shut down. And I was curious about, do you have any insight as to the company that's taken it over and the possible economic impact it might have on our region?
I don't know a lot about it. I saw that the company did one of the SPAC mergers and got a lot of financing, which I think is important, because anybody who's coming into this business can't believe how much capital it eats. So I thought that was a good move for the company. I forget what it's called now, actually. And it's going into, I think it's going to do pickups, which is a good big segment. And so if you can get a niche and build, reasonably cost competitively, you could build a brand around that. And it's not out of the question to me that they could be successful. It's not easy. Ford, GM are going to spend like crazy to protect that segment because it's so much of their profitability. But, I would argue when you've got three players with 95% of the market, that's the place to attack. Just because some people want to be different. Ram was almost out of that, and they did a good job, and they built up to, 20% penetration in the segment. Toyota's never really, they've done okay, but they haven't been able to crack through. But it's just a bit inconsistent with their brand. But look, it's for sure not a foregone solution, but I think or foregone conclusion that they will be successful, but I think they have a chance. You know, if they execute well, they're in the right segment, if they do a thoughtful job on how to brand and differentiate, you know, I think they got a chance.
Okay, I think we'll wrap up our regular meeting at the moment, and I see where Rick said he would hang around for a few minutes afterwards, so we have a few more questions, but we have a tradition where someone responds to your talk, and today our resident car guy, Howard Boyle, is going to give us a response.
Rick, I'm sure that I was asked to do this because I am the local car historian. I have several antique cars and I spend a lot of time with them. And I'm tremendously interested in what you have to say. And I think it's been a really a very, very good program today. I'm also excited about the fact that we have someone who actually held the same job as Billy Durant and Alfred P. Sloan. That is pretty impressive to me and as a car enthusiast. And I just want you to know that one of my favorite cars that I have is a 1953 Chevrolet Bel Air two-door hardtop. And I get an awful lot of satisfaction sitting behind it and driving it, even though I know that the cars of today, it's a good thing I'm in the age that I am, because I recognize that the new cars today, for someone who has a car interest and wants to restore one, probably can't even find the dipstick. So it's just a lot of change, a lot of differences, all for the good, I'm sure, and we'll adjust to it. And thank you so much for coming today. And Tom Myers, I have to tell you, your programs this month have been remarkable, and I'm just impressed the fact that you know all these people. And this is our programs this month, Rick, have been Friends of Tom, and it's been impressive. And so you added to this list, and we appreciate you coming today and spending your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Howard, and thank you. Thank you, Rick. Very comprehensive discussion here today. And we're going to end it. And if you want to hang around for more questions, feel free.
Hey, Rick, Tom Myers. You still there?
Still here, yes, sir.
Okay, good. Thanks for doing this program today. I had a quick question. I know you and Kathy spent some time in Europe. And what are the 2 or 3 differences that you see between the European car industry and the U.S. North American car industry?
So the primary difference is just the size of the vehicles. So Europe, you know, people tend to live in more urban settings there. You got a lot of these cities, the roads were, you know, started 2,000 years ago, and they're about that wide in some of these small towns in Italy. And they've just had a tradition of taxing the heck out of fuel for other reasons. And so, you know, the average vehicle used in Europe is much smaller than used in the US. I don't know, if there are 100 US sized pickups sold in Europe in a year, I'd be surprised, maybe 1,000. But, you know, you compare that in the US, we sell almost no really small cars, few exceptions. And the weight of the industry sales have shifted to, you know, SUVs, trucks, and crossovers. So I think that's just the biggest difference. And it isn't a, you know, a statement that sort of supports the view that you can only drive globalization in this industry so far, because, you know, the US pickup truck, again, it's basically used to be sold in the United States, Canada, obviously Mexico, the Middle East, and Venezuela. And then probably not in Venezuela anymore for obvious reasons, but it's just a function of you know, low gas prices relative to the rest of the world and big geography. So it's those kind of factors that drive the difference. But I think that's really the biggest driver of the difference, I would say.
One other question. You already told us you have a Corvette in your garage, I think. What's your other car, your everyday car?
So, well, I regularly drive a Cadillac Escalade because we go back and forth to our place down south a couple times a year, and I need to carry a lot of crap. So I have an Escalade. Kathy has a Chevy Traverse. And then in the garage in the guest house, we have the Corvette. We have a Pontiac Solstice, which is a fun little car, and a Chevy SSR.
So you're still a loyal GM customer.
I am. I've never bought a vehicle other than a GM vehicle, and there's no reason. I don't have to. I just do it. Yeah.
Good for you.
Rick, this is Lee Higgins, and I'm wondering, you mentioned the Rivian. Is that the truck that will actually do a crab walk? And can you say a little bit more about it?
Yes, Lee, I can say about as much about the crab walk as you know, because I saw the same video. But yeah, so I started working with RJ Scaringe, who's the founder, probably back in 2012. And I'd seen a lot of new ideas for vehicles, but I thought he had such a good way of thinking about a way to develop products to sell in niches of the industry and create a profitable business model. And he's such a nice guy, you kind of wanted him to succeed. He's a very smart guy, but a very nice personality. And so we worked on that for a long time. And he wasn't actually initially either pickup or all electric, but because it took forever to raise the money to do what he wanted to do, these trends sort of came together. And I think it's really, I probably go down to his place once a year, or his big engineering center here in Detroit. And it's really just remarkable to see how it's advanced. The other thing though, it's remarkable how much money he spent. I mean, he raised a lot you probably saw a couple of years ago, year and a half ago, December, he had an investment from Amazon, I think about $500 million or 600 million or 700 million, then 500 million from Ford, Cox Automotive, 300 million. And then he's done a couple more rounds of financing. So, I mean, it just highlights to me that, hey, this is an expensive business to get into, but I think he's got a good chance to build a brand, and he's got a good focus on how he wants to position the company. And he's got a contract, by the way, to build 100,000 electric delivery vans for Amazon. So that's a good place to start. And I think that's going to be a good and a broad business. So yeah, I bet on him a lot. It's pretty cool. And the performance, which you were talking about, Lee, of the EVs, it's going to surprise people in that truck. It's actually in some ways going to perform better than traditional trucks. And so, it's people who buy Fords or GMs love them, but I think he's going to find a niche in the industry, I think.
Thank you.
Where are they manufactured?
They bought the old Mitsubishi plant in Normal, Illinois, which I think is southern part of Illinois. And it's a big facility, and they bought it for nothing. And so that's where they're manufacturing. The sort of engineering product development center is in a suburb of Detroit. And he's got a big battery center down in LA and a big software center in the Bay Area. So he's sort of gone to where the expertise is and obviously knitting that together is a challenge, but that's the structure that he's got now. And I think he's got enough space at that Normal plant to handle their needs for a good while.
I would like to ask a question. Rick, thanks for being here. What would have happened if the government had not moved in to bail out the auto industry in 2008, 2009? Some of my friends I'm in business with argued against it. I didn't know what was right. What would have happened?
Well, I think, in the extreme case, it would have been pretty bad because, no one would buy a vehicle from a bankrupt auto company. You might buy a plane ticket on a bankrupt airlines because, you're going to use that in the next 30 days, but that's not the way you think about buying a car. It's a much bigger purchaser. You keep it a longer period of time. So your revenues would have plummeted to nothing. And so I think if you went through a traditional bankruptcy process, the company would have gone under and assets would have been sold. We did, obviously on a very low-key basis, but with a sort of the best guy in workouts and bankruptcies, happens to be a personal friend here, Jay Alex. We actually developed a approach to bankruptcy, which we felt could have the prospect of getting us through in 30 days. And if we'd have done that, then I think we could have made it, but that would have been rolling the dice pretty heavy. The process, by the way, was the one that the U.S. government actually used when they, they injected the capital, but put Chrysler and then GM through that bankruptcy process because they wanted to, sort of sack the equity and force the debt holders to renegotiate and wipe up a bunch of other liabilities. But I think the base case is that it would have been extremely ugly. There was a plan which thankfully did not have to be used. But I think the thought process was, and everybody sells their book, but GM had a liquidity problem, and they had a liquidity problem because there was no capital in the markets. It wasn't a business problem; it was a liquidity problem. And you look at what happened during the COVID period. Very interesting. The amount of money versus, remember we were trying to get $25 million, or $25 billion, and they treated us like we were from Mars. Like as soon as this COVID thing goes through, Congress passes a $2.3 billion program. So I think that tells you something about just the way these things are thought about. But also the Fed in the 08-09 period moved very slowly to address liquidity in the system because they hadn't done it before like that. And this time they put another $3.5 billion or something, $3.5 trillion, excuse me, in the market almost instantaneously, and they continue to do that, buying corporate debt, et cetera, which they didn't do for us. So I think, at that time, frankly, it was a tough experience because the U.S. economy hadn't gone through it, and the support mechanisms were slow to react. And I just look at this COVID situation and marvel at how much more effective the reaction was and how much that reduced the impact on the economy, by the way. One other point, which some people don't get, the auto industry, the OEMs are their working capital is very pro-cyclical because they buy parts, which are a lot of the vehicles, pay for them normally in, let's say on average, 45 days. They can turn those parts into a car and get paid for that within about 15 to 20 days. So they get 30 days of working capital on their balance sheet. That's great. As long as you produce more, you're getting that working capital on your balance sheet. When you cut production, that flows out from your balance sheet. So if your rate of production, back then we had about $20,000 working capital float for vehicles, per vehicle. So if you reduce, as we did, production rates by 1 million units a year annual rate, you have an outflow of cash, $20 billion, just like that. So that's what happened to us. We had that outflow of working capital cash. Plus the business was not profitable. It wasn't hemorrhaging cash, but it wasn't profitable. But we had a tremendous outflow from that, and the capital markets were dead. So that, we ended up in that most uncomfortable position, which I do not look forward to revisiting myself. But I think if the companies had just raw gone into bankruptcy, it would have been pretty tough, and the impact in certain parts of the country, particularly Midwest, would have been devastating. And I had a friend who wrote a book about this and said, well, how come the banks fly down to Washington and get given 25 billion checks each, and the auto companies, which employ more people, et cetera, have to go down and beg, have to drive down, God forbid, and beg, and get beat up pretty badly. And it's a fair political question as to why was it played out differently. So yeah, anyway, that's my view. Thanks for letting me sell my book on that.
Thank you.
Rick, if I could, just one follow-up question. I gather from the acronym OEM, you're talking about our existing auto manufacturers. What does OEM actually stand for?
Sorry, original equipment manufacturer. But in the auto industry, we tend to, those are Volkswagen, Ford, GM, Chrysler, as opposed to the supply base, as opposed to the dealers. But yeah, I should have. Yeah, sorry about that. I tried to steal.
I'm impressed. That was the only one you threw out there that I think we knew from the way you used it what it was, but didn't. That's just me. I need to know what the acronym stands for.
Sorry about that.
Not a problem.
Thanks for clarifying.
Okay, well, we've